The Middle East Institute at Georgia State University presents Arabic Grammar Unpacked. In this lesson, we will be discussing the past tense of verbs. Al-Kitaab introduces the past tense to us when Maha talks about her cousin Khalid. She says, Kana fi saf al-rabi', he was in the 4th grade, wa kuntu fi saf al-awwal, and I was in the 1st grade. Later on, in the next chapter, we're introduced to regular verbs in the past tense. Khalid begins his discourse with lakinna walidi rafada dhalik. That is, my father refused that. In the previous lesson, we were introduced to the 5 main parts of verbs. Amila, he worked, the past tense. Ya'malu, he works, the present tense. Al-amal, the act of working, the masdar or verbal noun. Amil, a worker, the ism fa'il or active participle, and ma'mul, something that has been worked, the ism maf'ul or passive participle. The past tense is, to Arabic grammarians, considered the root tense of the verb, and the most important one. It's called al-maldi, which means the past. Sometimes it's called the perfect tense, not to emphasize that it's flawless, but rather that it's complete, that it's over and done with. Ya'malu, the present tense, called al-mudari', which is a grammatical term, is often called the imperfect tense, again, not because it's flawed, but because it's incomplete. Al-amal, the masdar or gerund, is sometimes called the verbal noun in al-Kitaab, the act of doing that particular thing. Amil, the ism fa'il, which is the active participle or the doer of that action, and ma'mul, ism al-maf'ul, the passive participle or the done to of this action. This lesson will concentrate on the past tense. The first thing we're going to do is learn to conjugate in the past tense. So we'll start with the root verb, amila, again, which means he worked, but is also the name of the verb to work, because Arabic doesn't have an infinitive. This grid you're going to see a great deal. On the right-hand column, we have singular pronouns. In the middle column, dual pronouns, which al-Kitaab doesn't spend a great deal of time dealing with, to its credit. And on the left-hand column, the human plural pronouns. Remember, non-human plural is, of course, feminine singular. The top row, we have the first person, I and we. There is no first person dual. The middle row, we have the second person, you. The bottom row, we have the third person, he, she, and of course Arabic doesn't have an it, and also human plural, they. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take amila, the root verb, and we're going to get rid of the final fatha. And this is going to become the stem of the verb. And to this stem, we are going to add suffixes. And we're going to use the same suffixes for every single verb. No matter how irregular or strange that verb may be, it's going to use the same set of suffixes in the past tense. So let's begin with ana. Ana amiltu, I worked. Notice that the suffix here begins with sukun, and then we have ta with dhamma. Later on, it's going to become much more important that some of the suffixes begin with sukun and others do not. For now, just keep it in the back of your mind. Anta amilta. So here it's the same suffix except fatha instead of dhamma. Anti amilti. It's the same suffix except here we use kasra rather than fatha. Notice that both the anta and anti forms rhyme. Anta amilta, anti amilti. This is true of all the second person forms. Huwa is just the root verb, amila. Again, amila can mean either he worked or the name of the verb to work. Hiya amilat. Here the suffix begins with fatha, and then we have ta with sukun on it. So hiya amilat can either mean she worked or some group of non-human plural objects, they worked. Notice that ana, anta, anti, and hiya all are going to look exactly the same in an unvoweled text. They're simply going to end with the letter ta. And this is a big problem for intermediate and beginning Arabic students when you're reading a formal text, is decoding who exactly is doing that action there. This is something that even advanced students will occasionally mess up. So just pay careful attention to it and always try to figure out who is doing an action. Sometimes Arabic grammar doesn't make it the easiest thing to figure out. For the dual forms, which al-Kitaab doesn't spend a great deal of time on, we'll begin with antoma, you two people, which gives us amiltuma. Again, like all the second person forms, it rhymes. And then we have two versions of the same pronoun, homa. Homa means those two, And in the first example, we have those two masculine or mixed, and it's amila. The suffix here is just the letter alif, the long vowel alif, which here forms the lem alif character because the verb amila happens to end with the letter lem. And then we have those two women, and it gives us amilata. This form is not widely used in modern standard Arabic, especially in less formal discourse. For the human plural pronouns, we have nahnu amilna, again, beginning with sukun, and though it looks like it ought to be amilna, here in this case it's just amilna. The long vowel alif is a little bit of a misspelling almost. Antum, the rest of them rhyme, so you can guess it's amiltum. Again, beginning with sukun. Antunna is the you ladies form of antum, and it's going to rhyme as well. Amiltunna. Hum, human plural they, is the odd one out in this case. Its suffix is long vowel waw with a silent alif. So this looks like amilwa, but it's really amilu. The alif is silent. This is a spelling holdover from Quranic times. And here the emphasis in the verb falls at the end instead of on the sukun syllable. So amilu, the accent falls on the last syllable in this case, not amilwa like it looks. Hunna is those women, and it's amilna, and it's going to be pronounced just like the nahnu form, only it's going to be spelled a little bit differently. So before we move on, you might want to take a screenshot at this point, because then you can either put this screenshot in your files or print out the screenshot and put it in your notebooks, and that way you can keep track of the past tense verb conjugation. Before we move on, again, a few observations. Some of the suffixes, all of the first and second person suffixes, and the hunna, those women form, all begin with sukun. For right now, with regular verbs like amila, this isn't going to make any difference. But later on, when we start talking about irregular verbs, this is going to make a great deal of difference. So it's something you might want to keep in the back of your head. Again, all the second person forms rhyme. The ana, anta, anti, and hiya forms all end with the letter ta, so they're going to look exactly alike in an unvoweled text. And the hum form ends with long vowel waw and silent alif, and its emphasis is going to go on the last syllable, amilu, not amilwa. Al-Kitaab doesn't deal with the dual and all-female forms very much because they aren't really widely used in the standard language. So here I've grayed them out, and if you want to take a screenshot of this and put it in your files, that's the slightly simplified version of the original one, go ahead and do that now. Now, using the past tense is really quite simple. We can say, Amiltu fil mekteba laylat ems. I worked in the library last night. One thing that you'll notice is that, like with present tense verbs, you don't always have to use the pronoun. In this case, amiltu means I worked, so adding the pronoun would be a little bit redundant. A native speaker might use it to emphasize that I worked in the library last night and you didn't, and that would be the use of the pronoun here. But you can have a perfectly good sentence without the pronoun in the past tense. We can use question words with the past tense, and they work just like they do with the present tense. Hal amilta fi dhalik al-matam. Did you work in that restaurant? Or aina amilti laylat ems. Where did you work last night? And in this case, because we have the full voweling, we can tell that we're talking to a woman. So, amiltu fil mekteba laylat ems. I worked in the library last night. In formal discourse, literature, journalism, and so forth, the past tense is often preceded by the little particle qad. Qad amiltu fil mekteba laylat ems. It doesn't really change the meaning of the sentence at all. It really just emphasizes the formality of the discourse. Sometimes it might come out as something like already. Qad amiltu fil mekteba laylat ems might in some instances be glossed as I already worked in the library last night. It's over, it's done with. That's what qad is really emphasizing. So since the past tense already describes something that's over and done with, it's a little bit redundant, but it's often used in formal discourse, so keep an eye out for it. At the beginning of a paragraph, qad becomes laqad, and the meaning doesn't change. It's simply a stylistic thing. Laqad amilat Zahra kathiran al-usbu' al-maldi. Zahra worked a lot last week, or Zahra already worked a lot last week. To negate the past tense, we simply put the particle ma before the verb. We're used to thinking of ma as meaning what, as in ma ismuk, what's your name? But in this case, it does double duty. It negates the past tense as well. So ما عملت في المكتبة ليلة أمس. I did not work in the library last night. Think of ma as meaning didn't or doesn't, and it gets the point across pretty well. If we use a different negation particle, Arabic, like French or Spanish, uses double negation. So if we want to get across the idea that I have never worked in the library, we have to both use ma to negate the verb and then the negation particle at the end of the verb. So ma amiltu fil mektaba abadan means I have never worked in the library. And there are plenty of particles like abadan that we can use to negate sentences in various creative ways. If we're going to ask a negative question, hal plus ma becomes ama. So ama amilat Zohra al-usbu al-maldi. Didn't Zahra work last week? This is something that you should get used to because that particular combination of letters, alif, be, hamza, mim, alif, can also represent the word however or nevertheless. So see it in this case as the way of asking the negative question. Didn't Zahra work last week? So the past tense is very easy to use for the most part. It always uses the same set of suffixes. It represents actions that are already complete and no longer ongoing. And if you learn this set of suffixes, you can use pretty much any verb in the past tense.